Hey guys, welcome to the shop. Today I'm going to walk you through my process for doing deer mounts. Now, if you are lucky enough to get a deer, or you have a friend that got a deer and you want to mount that deer head, you might want to do a European mount, which could have a plaque that looks a little bit like this. And you can mount the head this way or this way. I have another video that shows how I did that. But if you're going to be doing a shoulder mount, you'll probably want a plaque that looks more like this. So, pro tip, make sure you know the width of the deer's shoulders and the height, so that when you lay out the shape of your plaque, that it's not undersized. So let me first get into some things you're going to need, and we'll go from there. So basic tools, hand saw, table saw, radio arm saw, a jigsaw, or a bandsaw. Those are kind of the basics that you're going to need. Depending on what kind of shape you might want to put on the edge of your plaques, you could use a handheld router or a table router. Now for the shape of your plaque, I would recommend you get some heavy construction paper. If you don't have that, maybe cardboard, cereal boxes, put something together like that. And I would recommend that you draw a center line first on your paper. Now, how do you go about doing your curves? Back in the old days when I was in drafting class, we had these shapes, and they come with all kinds of different curves. We've even used them in drafting to make railroad curves. But if you don't have something like that, what I would recommend is you get something like this. Different containers come with different curved shapes, so you can use those perhaps to do some of your curve work. In any event, once you have your center line drawn, go ahead and start laying out whatever your desired curves are. Once you have that laid out, take a sharp knife and cut 1/2 of your pattern out. Take that half, fold it over along your center line, and then trace the other side. That way you'll have equal proportions on both sides, and then you can cut your entire thing out and lay it on your wood. And for this project, I have a piece of 2-year-old honey locust. Honey locust is pretty hard, just slightly softer than black locust. And what I have done is I've taken a piece and I've planed it down. And so you want this to be the width of whatever plaque you're making, or slightly wider. And one tool I forgot to mention, or two tools actually, a surfacing planer and or a big wide sander. So I've laid out the board. It shows I can get 3 pieces out of this, and it also has a slight twist to it. So what I'm going to do is cut off one end. That'll help me do the straightening without taking too much material off. In order to flatten something on the surfacing planer, I have an 11-inch wide, perfectly flat board with a stop on this end. And I can put my board on here and see what kind of wobble I have. So if I hold the one end and put a shim in here, that will secure that. And make sure my shim doesn't go anywhere. And screw that down. Now I can run this through the planer and get rid of the high spots. So we finished all of our planing. You can put your pattern on at this point. Since I already have a plaque, which is sturdier than a piece of paper, I'm just going to use this as my template. And I'll trace, I have 4 pieces. So I'll trace those 4, and then we'll be ready to go over to the bandsaw. Now after the bandsaw, another tool I didn't mention was if you have a orbital sander, belt sander, drum sander, you'll need something to sand curves like that. Or if you were in shop class in the 1960s, you'd be doing that by hand. For the next part of the process, I'm going to be rounding over these edges, and we'll do all 4 pieces, and then we'll move to the plaques and they will get a profile. When running the profile on these bigger cutters, I like to sneak up on the bit. I won't go the whole depth. I'll stay away, I'll run the entire circumference, and then I'll come back with a finishing cut. As with most woodworking projects, there's some sanding to be done, so I'll be going over these edges, sanding off those little fuzzies, getting it to look a little more like this. And then for these brackets, there's a little bit of a ridge line where the router kind of left the mark. So we'll sand those off, and I won't bore you with all the sanding. We'll be right back. For mounting this bracket to the plaque, I need to drill a hole at a diagonal, which will attach to the skull of the deer, which will run this way. That hole will be plugged with these 3/8 inch mushroom head plugs. And so what I'm going to do first is get the angle that I need. Just put that on there and see if it's close, and it is. Double check that. Looks good, so we'll go over and put that in the vise and drill it. Once you know what size screw you're going to use, pick out a drill bit that is slightly larger so that you're not screwing down through this wood, but it just goes into it. The finish I'm going to be using is a first coat of red oak stain by Minwax. And what I like to do is just apply that with a brush. Let that sit for just a second. Your stain will depend upon the kind of wood you have, if it's a light or a dark wood, whether you burned your wood or not. So you have a lot of flexibility there. And if you need to, you can generally mix oil-based stains to get the desired tone you wish. So I'm just going to do one side, because generally the harder the wood is, the less stain is going to penetrate. And if you have something like pine that you're using, which is very porous, you might want to give it a thin coat of cut shellac or some other product that would semi-seal the wood so you don't get a lot of soaking in. And then we'll just go over these and wipe off any excess stain. We'll set these aside to dry. The next step will be giving these pieces a coat of lacquer, followed by a light sanding with 320 and a second coat. So as the lacquer on the plaques is drying, I want to deal with this skull from 2 years ago. It has never been treated and it has started to turn a little bit tan. And so we're going to try some whitening. I've got some hydrogen peroxide that we're going to be using, and before I do that, I'm going to wrap this base with a little bit of saran wrap. And that's because we don't really want to get any whitening occurring on the skull. So we'll get that fastened down. Then around this base, we want to wrap that with some electrical tape. That's looking pretty good. Just double checking. Sorry about that little shake. I have my tape sticking to my tripod. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is I've prepared this little tray and I've put some spacers in it just to take up some volume. And I have a plastic trash bag I'll put down in there. We'll set the skull in. Get ready to pour some solution. So I'm going to be using is some 12% hydrogen peroxide. I'm not going to cut it with water. Some people do. You can go to the drugstore and get 3%. I'm using something a little stronger. We're going to pour that on and do some brushing. So we'll see how far a gallon goes. I think at this point what I want to do is just cut some strips of paper towel and let that soak. And add a little more paper towel to that. That'll help keep things from drying out, obviously. So keep adding liquid. Might as well just keep adding some in here. That's pretty good. Used about 7/8 of a gallon. It is about 20 minutes to 4. And I'll keep an eye on it and see what the whitening looks like. It's been 2 hours, so let's take a look at what we have. That's not as white as that. So maybe we'll let that soak some more. It's been a little over 4 hours of soaking. And I thought that this might come out whiter here. Looks like it has gotten a little whiter, but not a lot. So we're going to rinse this off, and then I'm going to tape this up to draw it kind of together, and we'll let it dry. Okay, so we're going to wrap up the nasal area. You can do this with rubber bands if you want to. whatever works for you, whatever you have laying around. So we're going to let that dry for probably a day or so, and then we'll mount that on the plaque. It's about a day and a half later. I've allowed the skull to dry, and it is noticeably whiter. Still kind of some off-white up in here, but I think for our mount, that'll be just fine. For mounting purposes, I've marked the center of my plaque and approximately the 2 locations where I'll be drilling holes to mount this bracket. This will go here, and this screw will go into the base of the skull. So right now I'm going to drill a pilot hole to get that hole marked. I want to make sure that this bracket is tight up against the skull. Just kind of feeding my drill in till it hits the skull, and then holding everything in place. Check for a little pilot hole. I think that's it, but I'm going to double check. That is the pilot hole, so just double checking my angle here. We'll finish drilling that. So now I want to screw this bracket into that pilot hole. Get this at the right angle. Try to keep my hands out of the way so you can see. That's getting pretty close to where I want it. Don't want to over tighten it too much. So that seems pretty good. Now we'll mount this onto the plaque. So I've drilled the holes in the plaque a little bigger so there's some wiggle room for the screws, so I can get them lined up the way I need them to be. And I need to find that second hole. Okay, I think we have that. So I'll screw one in fairly tight. Check it for Everything being square. I can go back, finish up with this. The last thing we're going to do is put this little button in here. Well, viewers, that's going to wrap it up for another project from the shop. Hope you might have learned something on how to make a modified European deer mount, as well as how to go about making custom plaques for your next trophy mount. So if you've enjoyed the video, I hope you'll consider giving it a thumbs up and a like, and consider joining the channel. View my next project. I'm going to be starting on a special end table for a relative. Hope to catch you next time. Take care and be well.